right, I'll turn it over to you, Sam.
All right. Thank you, Carolyn. Can you hear me okay? And can you see the slides?
Yes, they look fantastic.
All right. I love that shot of Baltimore. Um, Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Sam Furio. I am the outreach coordinator for the building decarbonization team at the Maryland Department of the Environment. Our team at MDE is responsible for developing and implementing the proposed building energy performance standards. And so today we're going to do a crash course, Beps 101, for the local government cohort here. And again, just want to thank you all for being here and being, taking part today. We look forward to hosting many more of these sessions and working with, local counties and local jurisdictions in Maryland on Beps implementation, and also learning from all of you about your jurisdictions and your constituents within your jurisdictions. And so we hope, you know, you can take information from today's session and push it out there to your colleagues and spread awareness on Beps. And with that, we're more than happy to provide materials for you and also join in, on any sessions you want to host to provide any Q&A or additional clarity in the background. So, um, and if this is your first time hearing about Beps, do not sweat it. This is 101. You're not behind the times at all. We're going to do a good overview today, and we have a bunch more sessions coming up that you can take part in to learn more. So with that, we can. Oh, and I will also say, if you want to stay in touch with the happenings of the cohort, we can drop the listserv for the cohort in the chat at this time. I'll ask Claire from Clearly Energy to drop that in the chat for us. So with that, we can get started. Let's see if I can navigate the slides. All right, there we go. So agenda for today, we're going to do a background on Maryland's proposed building energy performance standards, how it was formulated and came to be. And we're going to do talk about what a covered building is, or a building that is required to comply with the proposed regulation, and what owners of these covered buildings need to know and what they need to do to get started. And then we're going to highlight the performance standards portion of building energy performance standards at the end. And we will also have hopefully some time for some Q&A at the end. So just bear with me through the presentation. We'll hold questions till the end. So let's kick it off. And I will just, a special shout out to Clearly Energy and Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships for their collaboration and coordination of this local government cohort for Maryland's building energy performance standards. And just want to note that this project for Maryland Beps is being supported by the U.S. Department of Energy, and we appreciate their partnership, and also our partnership with Clearly and NEEP and MEA and
Hi
other
guys, this
state
is Helen
agencies.
Herman, and we talked.
I think just remember to mute your mics. We'll save any questions till the end. All right, so a little bit of background on the proposed building energy performance standards in Maryland. So for those of you that aren't aware, the Climate Solutions Now Act of 2022 requires the state of Maryland to reduce statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 60% by 2031 and achieve net zero emissions by 2045 compared to 2006 levels. And the Climate Solutions Now Act also required the Maryland Department of the Environment to develop a climate pollution reduction plan, as well as policies that are noted within the plan on how to meet the state's greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. And so one of the policies within the plan, which you can read online today at mde.maryland.gov, is the proposed building energy performance standards, and some other proposed policies to meet the statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals. And so the proposed BEPS not only aims to reduce emissions from the building sector, but also create net benefits and green jobs for the state of Maryland. So pretty 10,000-foot overview of Beps. Some key points here for the regulation. What are its goals? It's like I said, its goals are to reduce emissions from Maryland's building sector, and achieve how you know act as a critical part of achieving the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals. It also aims to reduce energy costs for all Marylanders and also improve indoor and outdoor air quality for all Marylanders. And so I mentioned during the agenda that term covered building. So that's a building that's required to comply with the regulation. And so for Maryland's proposed BEPS, a covered building is a building that's 35,000 square feet or larger, excluding any parking garage area. And so these covered buildings and the owners of these covered buildings must annually report energy consumption to us, MDE, um, by June 1st of each year. And so each year, owners of covered buildings are going to gather up their whole building energy consumption for their building and submit it to us via a benchmarking tool. Now, these first benchmarking reports are due next year, June 1st, 2025, and those first reports are going to include all calendar year energy data for 2024. And so that's the first requirements for building owners for the regulation. But then the performance standards part of the policy comes into play starting in 2030. So 6 years down the road, building owners are going to start meeting phased emission standards from 2030 and beyond, because like I said, we want to hit those greenhouse gas reduction goals of the state. And so owners of these covered buildings can also choose to pay an alternative compliance payment for a building's excess emissions over those emission standards. So more on these covered buildings within Maryland. So uh, via a preliminary analysis of the covered building stock in the state, there's over 9,000 covered buildings. And of those 9,000 covered buildings, you can see the count of the majority property types in the state. So of those 9,000 buildings, the majority of them fall into buckets like warehouses, office spaces, multifamily housing, and also retail stores. So taking that same analysis, that same covered building stock, we were able to display that across the state of Maryland. And so you can see that every county in the state of Maryland, excuse me, has a covered buildings, a building over 35,000 square feet. But primarily, the majority of the covered building stock falls between Baltimore and DC along that I-95 corridor. And so, as I said, buildings over 35,000 square feet, excluding any parking garage area, are required to comply with the regulation. Now, of those buildings over 35,000 square feet, there are certain building types that are exempt from the regulations. So those would be buildings that are designated as historic buildings or spaces, and they'd have to be individually designated by local, state, federal law. Public and non-public elementary and secondary schools, manufacturing buildings, agricultural buildings, and also buildings owned by the federal government. So those are buildings that are exempt from the regulation. Now, there's also, if a building needs to report energy data to the department, so they don't fall into one of those exemption buckets, they are able to exclude certain energy uses when they report their whole building energy consumption to the department. So certain uses that are excluded or that can be excluded are energy use associated with food service facilities within a covered building, energy use associated with electric vehicle charging, and also the energy use associated with backup combustion generators only if the combustion generators or the backup generators are required by a state or federal law to run on combustible fuels. So those are exemptions from the regulation. And I will just make a note that we will make exemption forms available online for building owners who believe they fall into one of those exemption buckets that I mentioned for them to submit to us, and we will thoroughly evaluate each exemption request. So what does a covered building owner need to do? So first things first, they're going to determine if they're covered. They're going to determine their the accurate square footage and property characteristics for their property, and they're going to evaluate if they fall into one of those exemption buckets that I mentioned. Next step, and this is the most important step right now, is start benchmarking. So that's the process, like I mentioned, of using the benchmarking tool, Energy Star Portfolio Manager, to develop a profile for your building. So you're going to load in accurate property characteristics, square footage, et cetera, for your building. And then you're going to load in your energy data for the building, and it's going to spit out the performance compared to other buildings or compared to the performance standards part of the regulation. So once you start benchmarking, um, then you can assess whether the building is already achieving the proposed standards, which I will get into the different types of standards, but also if not meeting the standards, a building owner can plan to make improvements and determine when it's preferable to pay for the building's excess emissions via that alternative compliance payment that I mentioned. So just visually, the same process, how to get started. We're in this benchmarking phase right now. First reports are due June 1st, 2025. So there's still some time to get used to Energy Star Portfolio Manager and start practicing with that with some great trainings from EPA Energy Star online that are free. Um, so building owners can start practicing benchmarking, and annually, starting next year, they're going to submit annual energy use and greenhouse gas emissions to us via Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So once they start doing this benchmarking and seeing where they stand performance-wise, they can start assessing what they need to do to their building to hit these proposed standards that I'm going to get into. So down the road, 6 years, annually starting in 2030, building owners need to achieve these standards or achieve partial compliance with them and opt to take this alternative route, that blue arrow at the top, and make an alternative compliance payment in the form of a payment for those emissions overage. And so the performance standard part of this regulation, like I said, it doesn't start until 2030, um, takes shape as a phased reduction of on-site direct emissions by the type of building. So again, Beps is aiming to reduce emissions from the covered building sector and play a critical role in achieving the state's greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And so the performance standard within the regulation is a phased reduction in the direct emissions from the building. So as I said, it starts in 2030, and there are, like I said, it's a phased approach. So the first phase, interim standard 1, is going to take place from 2030 to 2034. Interim standard 2 is going to come into effect in 2035 and 2039, and the emissions standard for the property types is going to lower. And then the final standard is going to come in 2040 and beyond, and that all buildings, no matter the property type, unless they're exempt, need to hit net zero direct emissions from their covered building. So that is the emissions requirement for covered buildings within the proposed BEPS. And the second portion is that MDE intends to adopt an energy efficiency standard called Site Energy Use Intensity, or EUI, in 2027. And so as you're assessing your building's performance, we recommend, or making any upgrades to your building, we recommend not installing any inefficient electric equipment. And so I will just say here that building owners have a long runway. You know, whether this is your first time hearing about BEPS, you're still you're not behind the times. The first reporting deadline's next year, but the emission standards don't, or the performance standards don't come in until 2030. So you have what we like to say is a long runway to compliance here. And we're here to help you along the way, as well as our other agency partners and partners with the cohort are here to assist you in this process as well. And we will just add that, in our preliminary analysis, we show that a third of that covered building stock that I displayed earlier in the slides are already meeting that final standard of net zero direct emissions.
Oh,
Um, and so you will see how your building's performing once you start benchmarking. It's very possible that a building, you know, like I said, a third of the building's already meeting that net zero emissions. It's possible a building could already be meeting interim standard 1, or it's possible a building's already meeting interim standard 2. And so, you know, depending on where you fall, your runway might be extended even further. And so I just want to reiterate that you have time, and we are here to, assist in any questions you have and point you to helpful resources to help you in this process. And I also want to note that that alternative compliance payment, which I said is an option for building owners to pay a payment for their emissions overage over the standard. That's a flexibility for building owners. So let's say you benchmark your building, you're already meeting interim standard 1, and your building's not due for a mechanical replacement until 2037 when interim standard 2's already happening. Well, you have the option of paying that alternative compliance payment for the first couple of years of interim standard 1 or interim standard 2 if you'd like, and opting to make that payment instead of any kind of mechanical system replacement. So it's up to the building owner to determine what the most cost-effective route is, but that alternative compliance payment is a flexibility option for building owners. So that's the performance standards portion of this. And again, there is time to work with this. Right now, we just want everyone to start benchmarking. Get your property characteristics into Portfolio Manager, get some data loaded in, and let's see how you're doing. So with that, like I said, we're here to help along, this entire process. And we've been doing a lot of engagement throughout the regulatory adoption process, but also just recently in August and early September, and even through the rest of the year, we have a lot of engagement sessions. And so we have some engagement sessions that are coming up here on the screen. And we hope you're able to attend all of them. If you missed any of our previous engagement sessions, you can see them up on the Beps YouTube playlist on MDE's YouTube channel. I just asked if Claire could, if you wouldn't mind dropping our YouTube playlist in the chat for everyone. That'd be helpful. But if you missed a session, don't worry. We'll record it, put it up online. We're going to cover a bunch of different content and have that uploaded for you all. But just some upcoming sessions that we have. So September 10th, we're going to have a benchmarking and reporting working group session that's open to everyone. That is going to introduce the benchmarking and reporting process for Beps and also a benchmarking guide specifically for Maryland Beps. We're going to introduce that guide and also have a process for stakeholder feedback on that. Then we're going to have a cohort session on September 24th. That's going to be a benchmarking deep dive. So in preparation for that cohort session, we'd recommend joining the September 10th session so you get a nice framework of the Maryland Beps benchmarking process. And then on October 15th, we're going to have the second session of the benchmarking reporting working group, doing a deeper dive into the guide that will be distributed. And then also on October 25th, we're going to have a webinar with Maryland Department of General Services, or they will be hosting a webinar on local government decarbonization task orders. So, we hope you can join us in all of these sessions. But again, if you have to miss them, we have been recording and uploading to YouTube, so you can find us there as well. And like I said, we're here to help. Whether through the cohort or just reach out to our team individually. You can find our email here on the screen, beps.mde@maryland.gov, or our phone number, 410-537-3183. If you email us, call us, you're probably going to get me. And you can also access our website and our email listserv via the QR codes on the screen. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. And yeah, that's what I've got for today. And I think thank you all for listening. I think I can pass it back to Carol and move us
Yeah.
into Q&A.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sam. That was a great overview. And just a reminder for folks again, if you have any questions, comments, feel free to put them in the chat. Claire has been popping in a couple of links that Sam just mentioned for the upcoming calls, but also how to stay in touch if you're not already engaged with the cohort. Please do fill out that Google, that survey link. And so a couple of questions have come in. First one, Sam, is can you provide the list of covered buildings to counties and jurisdictions so we know who MDE will be reaching out to?
Yes, that we can definitely provide. It is on a old government looking web page that isn't fun to look at. So I'll get that link and how about we send it out to everyone after this, if that works.
Yeah, that sounds great. And that's actually a great reminder that, as Sam said, this webinar has been recorded. So we will be sharing the recording and the slides. Those will be emailed out to you afterwards. So we'll also take that list of covered buildings. The second question is what's considered designated historic? Would properties on the National Register, the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties, MHT easement properties, and locally landmark properties all be considered designated? Are there any others? So anything designated historic?
That is a great question. The specific wording is historic buildings and spaces designated as historic by local, state, and federal law. And we can, we're actually developing a historic properties working group for later this year, where we will talk about just this exemption and the process for exemption and what kind of supplemental materials will need to be provided, for a successful exemption of a historic property. So we can dive more into that during that working group, which will be, if you want to look for the sign up for that, we can also send out our informational sign up form as well, or informational session sign up form. That'll be posted there when it's available.
Great, thanks, Sam. I'll just take a pause. I don't see any other questions that have come in. So if there's any other questions that folks have, feel free to chat them in. We'll just wait momentarily. You might be getting off very easy today, Sam, because you did such a great job. All right. It doesn't look like any further questions have come in. As we said, we have recorded the webinar. We are sending out the slides. This is certainly not the first that you've heard from all of us. There will be more to come. So please stay tuned. Please stay engaged, and we hope to see you on future webinars. So Sam, would you like the last word?
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for attending and for listening. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us again via this contact info. And we have plenty of engagement coming up, so we hope you all can join in for that. And yeah, so thank you again to Clearly Energy and Neat for putting this all together. It's great to be with you all, and we look forward to learning more from you all about your counties and your local jurisdictions and your constituents. So
We
thank
had
you
one
all.
more question that snuck in, but you still get the last word, which is if they have solar panels on the roof, do they have to report their output?
That is a great question. So I will just say that the emissions standard for Beps focuses on direct on-site emissions from buildings. So we're focused on, combustion within a building, and so um, the grid emissions aren't included in our direct on-site emissions for a covered building. And unless there's a caveat, unless a building is connected to a district energy system, which is pretty rare. So In that regard, for most covered buildings, a solar system on a roof would not reduce its on-site emissions from the property. So, in that regard, a solar system on a building does not apply to Maryland's BEPS.
Great. Well, that is it. Otherwise, there's lots of thanks in there. So thank you once again for joining, and thank you to Sam.
Thank you all.
Have a great
Appreciate it.
rest of the day. Bye, everyone.